Hello, my name is Robert Dean Steele, and this is Real Living. Listen to what it says in Ecclesiastes 3:11. Yes, can we get wisdom from Ecclesiastes? Oh, yes. Solomon writes, says this, He has made everything beautiful in his time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. Now, I love how Solomon puts it. Now, you have to understand, Solomon was a philosopher. He was a poet. He was a writer of Psalms, a writer of Proverbs, the wisest man who ever lived. And when he wrote this, he may have been in a discouraged state. But there was one thing that he knew, and that was this. The Lord has made everything beautiful in its time. Isn't that a great thought? The Lord has made everything beautiful in its time. It may appear at the time rather ugly, might be discouraging, but when you allow the Lord to work the full situation out, it's wonderful how it might even turn out to be a real blessing. There was a number of years ago that I was on a sabbatical. I had gone through a very difficult time in my ministry, and I needed time to take off. And so my wife and myself, we had a little trailer given to us. It was in Winfield, British Columbia. And I remember at the time going for long walks and saying, God, I need to be healed. God, I need to see things differently. And I remember spending many, many long hours in prayer. And at the time, I think I was rather discouraged and in a bit of a despair, a bit of a funk, you might say. But the interesting fact was that, a couple years after that had happened, I discovered that that was one of the most meaningful times of my entire life. There were several lessons that I learned. One lesson was that God can meet every need. I was raising 3 small children at the time. Every one of them was under the age of 10. And I didn't have a regular job. I worked for about 5 or 6 weeks during that entire 7-month period. And the rest of the time, I had no money. There was no money coming in at all. And yet we saw God provide over and over and over again. And it was in that time that I learned the beauty of waiting on the Lord, the beauty of God's provision, the beauty of rest. By the 4th or 5th month, I had settled down. I was resting in the Lord, and I was trusting Him for the next point of view. Sometimes I got a little bit frustrated, and my wife would say to me, go out and pray again. You need to pray again. And I would go out and pray again, and God's peace would come in. What it's saying is this: He's made everything beautiful in its time. You have to understand that God has a timing, and we need to trust Him in His timing. He's also set eternity in the hearts of men. Did you know that there's a special part of us that looks at eternity? We look at not where we are right now, but where we shall be. We look at not this universe or this time period, or even the temporal part of our lives, but we look towards eternity. To that part of us that will be, because we only live 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 years. And in the time of eternity, it's just a vapor. But He says He has put eternity in our hearts. We fathom that our lives are more than what we have right now. That there's something eternal that God has called us to do. Well, part of that, of course, is to do the great commandment, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And then the great commission, which is to go into all the world and preach the gospel, presenting Jesus Christ to our world and situation. God has given us an eternal perspective. He's put eternity in our hearts. We need to see things from an eternal perspective. We need to see what God sees. We need to know what God knows. That's what He's basically saying. He has put eternity in our hearts. God wants to open up our shut hearts. Blaise Pascal put it this way: inside of us is a God-shaped vacuum that only God can fill. And when we allow God to fulfill it, He places eternity in our hearts. We recognize that we are just pilgrims passing through. But while we are here, we should do everything we can to minister God's love and grace. He says, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. What Solomon is saying here is simply this. He says, from the beginning of your life to the end of the life, You can't even possibly fathom the way that God has led and guided and directed your life. When I was 13 years old, I had a dream. And that dream was to be a radio announcer. And that was all I had my focus on. In fact, from the time I was 13 to the time I was 19, that's where my focus was. And then something happened. I got saved. And one day God said, I want you to go to Bible college. And I want you to become, just go to Bible college. So I went to Bible college. And then he spoke to my heart about becoming a pastor. And I became a pastor. But I never lost my love for radio. And the marvelous thing is God gave me, of course, radio back again. And I love that. But you see, from beginning to the end, I couldn't fathom or even comprehend how that each little incident, how each little moment was all part of that wonderful fabric that is the life of Robert Dean Steele. And he's doing the same thing in your life. Everything that happens to you may not fully understand it. The people that you meet, the situations that you find yourself is all part of this great big masterpiece called your life. Everything's going to be beautiful in its time. God has placed eternity in your heart. And yet, if you cannot fathom what God is doing from the beginning to the end, it's just a point of trust. A point of saying, God, I know that everything that you do is beautiful, that you've set eternity in my heart. I may not fully understand it, but I'm going to trust you to do that. Solomon gave us these words today, and let them be words that permeate and ring through your heart. My name is Robert Dean Steele. You have yourself a great and godly day.